I'm speaking in good faith today with Jimmy Akin. He lives in Fayetteville, Arkansas. He's an internationally known author and a speaker, senior apologist at Catholic Answers, with more than 30 years of experience both defending and explaining the faith. Jimmy, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, my pleasure to be with you today.
I've listened to just a little bit of podcasts and some other video that's available online to know that you're an engaging guest, an engaging person, and so I have been really happy that you would say yes to us.
Oh, thank you.
I want to just fill in just a little bit for our audience. Jimmy's a convert to the faith with an extensive background in Bible, theology, church fathers. We could do a whole podcast on that. I want to talk about that. Canon law, liturgy, and he's a weekly guest on the national radio program Catholic Answers Live, a regular contributor to Catholic Answers magazine, and he's a blogger and podcaster. Maybe a good place to start, Jimmy, is you call your conversion story a triumph and a tragedy. Is it possible to sum up that experience briefly?
Sure. So I just a little bit of background on my religious history before my conversion. So I was, my parents were Church of Christ, which is a common denomination here in the American South. They were both from Texas, and Texas is actually where I was born. But I grew up here in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and my parents had some kind of disagreement with the elders of their church when I was about 6 years old, and they stopped going. And so after that, I was raised nominally Protestant. We'd go to church a couple times a year when we visited relatives, but other than that, we really didn't go. When I was in my teenage years, I had a flirtation with the New Age movement. And then when I was 20, I abandoned the New Age movement and I believed God existed, so I was a theist, but I didn't think that anyone really knew anything about God. Then I had a conversion to Christ in an evangelical context. And one of the things I did as an evangelical was I made a point of studying the theology of all different branches of Christendom. Because here in Fayetteville, we've got bunches and bunches of churches. And I realized that what church is within convenient driving distance and what church has music I like and what church has a preacher I like, none of those are good tests of what's true. and so I want the truth. So I made a point of studying the theologies of all different branches of Christendom. And when I was 27, I made a discovery. I was reading a book. It happened to be by a Catholic. It had an extended quotation from Matthew 16 in it, which contains the "You are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church" passage. And I'd always argued, as I'd been taught, that Peter was not the rock, that the rock was something else. And I could argue that. I had multiple arguments for that. But as I was looking over this passage on this particular day, I realized there are structural features in the text that are so obvious. They're even there in English. You don't have to go to the Greek, although they're there in the Greek too. And they require that Peter be the rock that Jesus is talking about, that he says he's going to build his church on. So I had to change my opinion on that. And I said, well, if Peter's the rock on which Jesus builds the church, then once Jesus goes back to heaven, that means Peter's in charge. And whoever's in charge of the earthly church in Jesus's absence, that's a good description of the office of the Pope. And so if Catholics were right that Peter's the first Pope, whether there were later popes, I didn't know. That's a separate question. But if Catholics were right that Peter's the first Pope, then they could be right about other things. And so what I needed to do was go through all of the categories of systematic theology with an open mind towards the Catholic position. And so I took about a year. I was in grad school at the time. I took about a year doing that in addition to taking my classes. And I concluded that the Bible teaches the Catholic faith and I needed to become a Catholic. So this is the triumph part of the story. The tragedy part of the story is that my wife, Renee, she had always been in frail health throughout our marriage. And she had ulcerative colitis, and it would periodically flare up, and it would cause intestinal discomfort and things like that. And she had what we thought was another flare up of ulcerative colitis. And so we were trying to get her what help we could. We were very poor, but we were trying to get her what help we could. And it then turned out this is not ulcerative colitis. This is advanced metastatic colon cancer.
Mm.
And so, it was very, very aggressive. Her oncologist said he thought she'd only had it a few months, and it was just tearing through her system. From the time her first symptom manifested to the time she died was just over 2 months. And so she went from symptomatic to deceased in just 2 months.
Mm.
And I was actually received into the Catholic Church in her hospital room using the emergency shortened form of the rites 4 days before she died. And so that's the tragedy that happened at the same time.
I'm so sorry to hear that. I read a little about that, but did that allow her to die knowing that your marriage, the two of you, was valid for the Catholic Church?
Well, we'd already actually taken care of that.
Oh, okay.
When we got married initially, it was now she had been a Catholic growing up, but when we got married initially, it was outside of a Catholic context, and that it's debatable whether or not our initial marriage would have counted as valid in the church's eyes. But at a certain point, we had our marriage convalidated. That's the technical term. The more colloquial term for it is we had our marriage blessed. But we thus got married in a Catholic context. And at the time, I didn't tell her I was thinking about becoming Catholic because I didn't want to get her hopes up. And so we had our marriage convalidated, and so that was already taken care of.
Oh, that's lovely. I'm glad that she was still there for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Jimmy, you're called a senior apologist, and I get what senior is. Well, many meanings. I've just recently come into the just older than everybody else meaning of that, but this is the one where you're the chief one. What does it mean to be an apologist? Because this is a long Christian tradition. Lots of us know C.S. Lewis and some of the other apologists. What does that mean to you?
Yeah, well, so a lot of folks are not familiar with the word apologist or the field that apologists practice, which is called apologetics.
Right.
It unfortunately, we have a false friend in English, or what linguists call a false friend, which is a similar word that is misleading. In English, an apology in colloquial speech is an expression of regret, like you're saying, I'm sorry. But that's not what apologetics is. It goes back to Greek roots. Apologia in Greek means a speech from a position. And for example, Plato's dialogues, one of his first dialogues is called The Apology, and it's Socrates' defense of himself before the Council of Athens. And so what an apologist does is they defend a position. So I'm a Christian apologist, so I defend the Christian faith. And I'm also a Catholic apologist, so I defend the Catholic understanding of the Christian faith. And I've been doing it for 31 years now. So I'm actually not only the senior apologist at Catholic Answers, I'm also the senior employee now. Nobody's been there longer than me.
There is something, I mean, there's something about faith, even the word faith, which is that we have some sort of hope or belief in something, as Paul tells us, that we haven't seen yet, but we hope for, or that we somehow, we have a conviction of by the Holy Spirit or whatever other means that might be. And yet we want answers. We love answers. So you get lots of questions. And I'm wondering, I mean, it seems like that is a universal desire that we want answers. Sometimes we pray for them or we research to try and find them. Maybe this is a two-part question. The first one is, where do you turn when you don't know the answer to something someone's asking? And second, what's knowable and what's unknowable?
Well, so in regard to the first one, if I don't know the answer to something, I do my research. I if it what resources I will look up will depend on the nature of the question they ask. Like if
Mm-hmm.
they ask a canon law question, which has to do with the church's internal laws, well, then I'll look in the Code of Canon Law. If they ask a faith related question, I'll look in, let's say, the Catechism of the Catholic
Mm.
Church or other teaching documents that the church has. If they ask a liturgical question, I'll look in the church's liturgical documents. So the first thing I do is I identify what question, what category of question they're asking, and then I consult the relevant resources, looking for the most authoritative ones. Um, so that's the basic answer to that question. One thing, though, that I tend to get is a lot of questions that are not easy to, well, I'll put it this way, they're not standard for most apologists.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things I always do, my philosophy is there are no bad questions, only bad answers. And so anytime anyone asks me a question, I'll take it seriously. I don't care what the question is. And I'm not going to dismiss a question because it's weird or out there. I'm not going to make fun of the person who is asking the question. If someone wants to know something, I'll do my best to give them an answer. So people in our audience we're on between 300 and 400 radio stations here in the U.S. People in our audience started to notice that about me. And so it's like, we could ask Jimmy anything and he'll take it seriously. And so they started asking deliberately weird questions, like if you're a vampire, can you commit suicide to avoid predating on other people? Or if you have a zombie, can you use the zombie for slave labor? And is it ethical to do that?
Does this mean you have
And
a Halloween edition of your program?
well, I do, but even more frequently than that, every couple of months we do a Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin show where we take deliberately weird questions and then I use principles from Catholic faith and morals to analyze the question and formulate a response. Even if it involves a fantasy scenario like vampires or zombies, I can still take actual principles and deduce an answer. Like if vampires were real, here is the answer. Or if zombies were real, here is the answer. I also have another podcast called Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, where I look at mysteries of all different types. They can be historical mysteries, they can be true crime, they can be scientific mysteries, they can be paranormal mysteries, they can be religious mysteries. And unlike a lot of mystery-based shows, I don't just try to generate wonder. I try to solve the mysteries to the extent possible. And so I've done a lot of study in areas like parapsychology, for example. Now, one of the things about a lot of these mystery-based questions is there's not a Catholic teaching about subjects like this. So I don't have a definitive answer to give people. Instead, and this gets into the second part of your question about what's knowable.
Right.
Well, if God's given us the answer to a question, then we know the answer. But a lot of times, God has not given us the answer to a question, in which case the best we can have is informed speculation. And so I try to point out if there's not a definitive answer, I pointed out we don't know the answer to this. And then I try to give informed speculation where I point out different possibilities and which ones have better evidence in their favor. And I may give my opinion, but I always flag it as this is just my opinion.
Right.
You can have your own opinion. This is not something we've got a definite, settled answer on. So there's a lot we actually don't know. Now, people will think commonly that the Catholic Church, because it's been around for 2,000 years, they'll think it has an answer for everything. But actually, the church's teachings are more restricted than you might think. And there's a lot of room for diversity of opinion in the Catholic Church. Many things the Church has no teaching on at all, and it allows theologians or other experts in other fields like, science, to figure out the answers to things. And so if there's not a firm teaching on something, what I do is I point that out, and I try to articulate the range of different options that are available for people. And I may give my opinion, but it's always flagged as my opinion, because there's a lot we don't know, and we do indeed live in a mysterious world.
Yeah. Which is kind of exciting in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it is.
Boy, so many different questions I'm excited to ask you. In the time we have, I wonder if I could ask, you mentioned doing this for 30 years. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
our faith is a journey. Life and God give us experiences. We learn things. What do you know or feel about God now that you didn't 30 years ago when you were on this journey?
Boy, well, obviously my knowledge of various areas has grown a lot in 30 years.
Yeah.
I'm an autodidact, so I'm a self-teacher, and I'm always studying.
Mm-hmm.
And so in terms of intellectual knowledge of God, that's grown significantly in the last 30 years. In terms of a personal relationship with God and feelings, I think I have a better appreciation of God's love now than I did 30 years ago. We're told in the Bible that God is love, but the people we meet and how we're raised and the images of God that we're presented with in life can interfere with an accurate understanding of who God is. And so, I didn't have, I don't think, the same appreciation for God's infinite love then. I mean, intellectually, I knew, okay, God is an infinitely perfect, eternal being who's always existed. He's always been infinitely perfect. He's always been infinitely loving. But I didn't have as much of a feel for that in terms of my heart knowledge as I do now. So I would say that's one thing that I have grown in appreciation of.
Yeah. How have
over
you?
the last 30
I
years.
spoke with a monk at Trappist
Mm-hmm.
Abbey a couple of months ago, and he talked
Mm-hmm.
about the process of, he said, of his faith going from here to here,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is what you're describing.
Yeah.
How do
From
you?
head to heart.
Yeah, from head to heart. How did you? How do you experience God's love, or how did you come to that?
I tend to, so I guess I'd say a couple things. First one is there's lots of different spiritualities in the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
Some people have a Marian spirituality, some people have a traditionalist spirituality, some people have a Jesuit spirituality or Dominican spirituality. I have a meat and potatoes spirituality. I'm very basic,
Mm-hmm.
and I mean I understand a lot of things, but I don't identify with any one school. And so I have a very basic, practical approach. And I kind of take things one step at a time in life. And so when something happens, I respond to it, I deal with it, I pray about it, I trust God, I take a step forward, experimenting, hoping that I'm going in the right direction and trusting God to get me where I need to go in the end. And so it's really just sort of living life one step at a time in openness and trust, and letting God lead me where he wants me to go. And as you live life and as you get older, you're going to encounter problems. And one of the things the Catholic faith teaches is, since God is omnipotent, he wouldn't allow any evil unless he was going to bring good out of it. And so even when bad things happen in life, as they do, like your wife dying at age 27, good will ultimately be brought out of that bad experience. In fact, one thing that some people, and some years ago, I was taking a phone call from a guy who had been a Protestant minister, and he had lost his ministry because he had gotten involved with a woman other than his wife and so forth. And I was talking to him over the phone, and I was, I was expressing sympathy for his situation and trying to help him out in the ways I could. And then he later called back and he talked to one of my coworkers, and he remarked on me and said how I must have suffered
Mm.
to be that compassionate. And I hadn't really thought, and my coworker told me, and I hadn't really thought of it in those terms, but I'd certainly been through a lot of suffering, and I try to be compassionate and understanding for everybody and treat everyone with dignity. And I'd have to say that some of my own experiences, played a role in forming my character in that way.
Yeah,
At least that's what I'd assume.
definitely. I'm wondering if you are there particular saints you have felt drawn to or connected
Mm-hmm.
with?
Sure. So my confirmation saints are Philip Neri and Francis de Sales, and I picked them at the time, and this was at the beginning of my life as a Catholic when I was first confirmed. But I picked them, Francis de Sales, because he was an apologist. He was active in France, and he helped reconvert a lot of Reformed Protestants back to the Catholic faith, and that was something. I was coming from a Reformed Protestant background, and I wanted to do the same thing. Philip Neri I picked because he had a remarkable sense of humor, and even though he was a cardinal of the church, he didn't take himself seriously.
Mm-hmm.
Like, cardinals get red hats when they become when they're named cardinals, and he allegedly played the Italian equivalent of football with his red hat. He also had various mystical experiences that I found moving. I also feel drawn to Abraham from the Old Testament, in part because he lost his first wife too. And yet God continued to guide him, and he ultimately got remarried. And I've always harbored a hope that I'll get remarried one day too, although it hadn't happened yet. St. Paul, I love reading his writings. He's a brilliant mind. He's also got some sharp elbows, but he's a major biblical saint.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I have a maternal relationship with the Virgin Mary. In fact, when my own mother died very unexpectedly, she died at age 56, which I'm older than that now. She just came home one day and had an aneurysm. And it was totally unexpected because the women in her family lived to be almost 100. They lived to their mid to late 90s. And so she died 40 years too early. But I made it to the side of her hospital bed before she died. And I won't go through everything that happened, but one of the things I did was, now that I was Catholic, I entrusted the care of my earthly mother to my heavenly mother, Mary. And so I have a Marian devotion as well. And so those are some of the saints that I feel special resonances with. Although, as I said, I'm pretty meat and potatoes. I'm not super strong in any one direction.
Good. Well, thank you, Jimmy, very much for sharing those. That's meaningful to hear how they were chosen and why they resonated with you. There's so much misinformation that gets spread. One of the rules of Christopher Stendhal at the Harvard Divinity School Lutheran bishop was, if you want to know about someone's faith, go talk to them. Don't talk about them.
Yes.
And so I'm wondering, is there something that is misinformation that you wish people who are not Catholic knew about Catholicism that would maybe clear things up or be a misunderstanding you could explain?
Oh, there's a lot. Unfortunately, due to kind of the fractious nature of Christian relations, particularly in the last 500 years, here, and America being a historically Protestant country, there's a lot of anti-Catholicism in American culture. Now, fortunately, it's much, much less than it was, which is great. We've made progress. The passions from the Reformation era have cooled, and we're talking to each other in a much greater way than before, in a much friendlier way. But there are persistent misunderstandings. Now, because America is historically Protestant, the things I would clarify depend on the group. One of the things I'm really big on, I agree with Kirster Stendahl's statement about you need to talk to people about their faith instead of talking amongst yourselves about other people's faith. I'm a big believer, and I say all the time on our radio show, when people call in and say, how do I respond to this kind of person? I'll say, well, you need to start by asking them questions, about what they believe. Even if you think you understand the beliefs of whatever tradition they belong to, they may not have a firm grasp of their own tradition. They may have their own views on subjects. And if you really want to serve another person, you need to find out what this person believes. And the only way to find that out, unless you're really, really highly telepathic, is ask them questions. And so question asking is almost essential when you're trying to help someone, whether it's in an apologetic context or any kind of faith-based context. But, if you ask me, so what would you want people to know about Catholicism? The real answer is it would depend on the group I'm talking to. But since America is a historically Protestant country, one of the things that I think has been a significant source of misunderstanding is the doctrine of justification and salvation. Protestants use a formula that they say we're justified by faith alone. And they perceive Catholics as teaching something else, as teaching that we're justified by faith and works. Well, okay, there's a few problems with that. One of them is the Catholic Church does not condemn I'll say it this way. The Catholic Church in its documents never uses the formula justified by faith and works. It never articulates its faith in that way. Second, it does not condemn the formula by faith alone. In fact, as Pope Benedict XVI said just a few years ago, Luther's formula, justification by faith alone, is true as long as you understand the faith in terms of what St. Paul refers to as faith working through love in Galatians 5. If that's the kind of faith you have, if it's faith that not only includes intellectual belief and also trust in God and also love for God, then that faith does justify you, and you're in a state of justification or salvation. So we don't actually need to fight about this formula. And so people are also surprised to learn, who else agreed with that was John Calvin. on the Protestant side, he said, if your faith doesn't include love, it's not worth calling it faith. It's not the right kind. And so there's a technical term in theology for this kind of faith. It's sometimes called formed faith, meaning faith formed by charity or faith formed by love. But actually, the two sides can agree on justification by faith formed by love. And so right there, a huge bone of contention goes away between Protestants and Catholics. And I've been trying to get this message out to both Protestants and Catholics, both of whom need to hear that.
Yeah. And I have been just as a bit of a sidebar, but so impressed with Catholic charities and other groups that have done and are doing so much in their communities and really worldwide. And increasingly, it seems in the last decades, working together with other groups to accomplish the same goals that are held in common.
Yeah, well, people may not realize it, but Catholics invented both universities and hospitals. So that's where those things came from.
I'm wondering, what brings you the most joy in your faith?
Well, several different things. One of them is so kind of expanding out. One of the things is receiving my Lord in Holy Communion. Another is being forgiven my sins in confession. Another is the joy of discovery. I lead an intellectual life. I'm like I mentioned, I'm a self-teacher. I'm an autodidact, and I love discovering new things. And it's so cool to learn new things, whatever the field is, whether it's theology or I also study science. I study mathematics. I study a lot of different subjects, and I love learning new stuff. It is so awesome. And so, and that's one of the things that drives me to be an autodidact, is just the pleasure I get from learning new things. One of the things I sometimes see in various apologetics channels, whether they're Catholic or not, is, and there are people of all persuasions who are like this, but one of the things I sometimes see is apologists of whatever persuasion, including Catholic, who have a spiritually superior negative attitude, where what they're principally about is tearing down other people and looking down on other people and not really trying to understand the other people. And that kind of proceeding from a position of spiritual superiority to others and thinking, I and we are better than them, a constant diet of that. Now, there's nothing wrong in taking pleasure in being right. That's fine. But if you have a constant diet of looking down on other people, that's not spiritually healthy. That's the equivalent of physically pigging out on fast food every day, 6 times a day. You that is not healthy for you spiritually. And I look at apologists who take that kind of approach, where like every YouTube video they put out, they're just looking down on other people. It's like, don't you have any joy? Don't you ever learn something and just want to share it with others? Because it's so cool to have discovered this, and I think that bringing the joy of discovery to other people is spiritually healthy. And I think it's vastly superior in terms of spiritual health to constantly looking down on other people. Well, that then kind of brings me to the outer sphere, which is helping others, because by doing broadcasts and writing articles and interacting with people and answering their questions, I'm ultimately helping other people. And that brings me joy in the faith as well.
Oh, I love hearing that. Thank you. And I had another question, but really you just answered it, which was, I was going to ask how we can be an apologist for our own faith while we still listen to and value the experiences of people in other faiths. You've just said it, that we need to listen to people, understand. And I love that you may be for something and enjoy learning it, teaching it, without needing to feel like you degrade or look down on other people.
Yeah. I try never to look down on other people. I may sometimes, like with some of these other apologists, I think I try not to look down on them, but I will recognize, I think they're in a spiritually bad place. I pray that they are able to overcome that. I also, disagree with people's views, and I have arguments for why I disagree with them, but that doesn't mean they're a bad person. And I try never to make it personal. To give an example, a while back, I did a pair of episodes on Mysterious World on Ellen Gould White. She was the founding prophetess of Seventh-day Adventism. And I wanted to look at her, and so she reported visions and so forth. So I wanted to look at her visions from a neutral perspective. Because what I would find in going online and doing research on Ellen Gould White is, she obviously has her fans within the Seventh-day Adventist community, but in looking for an analysis of her claimed revelations, almost everybody was turning it into a theological fight, where they said Ellen Gould White taught this doctrine, and that doctrine is wrong, therefore she's a false prophetess. And that just reduces the question to, do you agree with her theology or not? And that is not what I wanted to do. I wanted to proceed. I'm actually a paranormal field investigator. I actually have training in parapsychology. I also teach parapsychology at the Rhine Education Center. So I wanted to look at Ellen Gould White's reported visions from a neutral perspective, where I'm not assuming anything about theology, and I'm just looking at the evidence of, do we have anything paranormal happening here? And so I tried to treat her, very neutrally. I tried to look at her visions very respectfully and evidentially. And I've actually been contacted by Seventh-day Adventists, including former Seventh-day Adventist preachers, who have thanked me for how I handled her respectfully, and they were able to listen to my evaluation in a way that they weren't able to listen to other people's evaluations because of the approach I took, rather than just trying to run her down because of theological disagreements.
Yeah, of which they had probably had their fill.
Yeah.
Finally, Jimmy, and what a pleasure
Mm-hmm.
to speak with you. You're so generous with your time and sharing your experiences. Is there if something doesn't come to mind, that's fine. Um, is there a certain scripture or chapter or maybe a parable, something in scripture that's kind of a touchstone for you? I mean, this can change at different times of our lives or where we've been
Yeah.
studying. Is there something like that?
Yeah, there is. So two things off the top of my head. One of them is Peter's exhortation. So one of them's intellectual, one of them's practical. The practical one is St. Peter's exhortation to cast all your cares on Jesus or God,
Mm-hmm.
because he cares for you.
Mm.
So if that, a lot of people, everyone at different points in their lives has anxieties, and God wants to take those anxieties and help you deal with them. So you don't need to be wrapped up in anxious thoughts all the time. So that's the practical one. The other one comes from St. Paul. In 1 Thessalonians 5, he says, he's talking to the Thessalonians, some of whom have apparently begun to despise prophecy. And he says, don't despise prophecy. Do not quench the spirit. That's what happens if you despise prophecy. You're quenching the spirit. Instead, he says, test everything and hold fast to what is good. And of course, the way you test something is you look at it critically. You don't just base it on feelings of how do I feel about this, because our hearts are unreliable. But you apply objective evidence tests, and is it consistent with what's previously been revealed, and so forth. And so test everything and hold fast to whatever's good.
Good. Thank you so much. You could find Jimmy Akin, that's Akin, at jimmyakin.com. Also,
Mm-hmm.
find his profile and some of his answers at Catholic.com.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for speaking with me today in good faith.
My pleasure.